Welcome everyone. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce you to the concept map that I used and that I created to show the connections and kind of the groupings of ideas in the full 1.1 section of the TDBoK, even though the exam only focuses on a few. So I don't need this over here. The way that I use this, rather than the start at the bottom, is I just drag and then I zoom in. So this legend at the top shows you how I mark the exam areas with the exclamation, and then I also bold those sections, the knowledge and skill statements throughout the whole TDBoK, and then the topics that are within those statements. It starts at the top here with 1.1, and that isn't the focus, but the 6 C's of communication are referred to in several places, and so this is a visual just to be able to see those 6 C's and then some actions that can be taken to accomplish those. The communication model of messages and encoding and decoding and filter, which are the barriers, the things that can cause it to be misunderstood, and then the process are also in that section. And then here's where the exam starts in 1.13, the skill for using communication strategies. It starts off outlining the role, the TD role. And then for me to conceptualize the principles and to have a way to remember them, I put them into this visual. So I looked at them as 4 building blocks with supporting actions. And one of the ones that stood out to me for gaining agreement was the need to communicate understanding, respect, and to show objectivity and neutrality. And the difficulty of that comes when someone expresses anger and there needs to be a way to diffuse it. And so one of the other sections was on diffusing anger, or depersonalizing and diffusing, and so there were some steps to be able to do that, or I conceptualized them as steps. So 4 steps with a 5th to defer if necessary. And since gaining agreement was one of the key principles, that I saw that connecting to the section on the skill in applying persuasion, and that wasn't one of the key areas for the exam, but if that's something that you want to look in further, one of the things that stood out to me in this section is in all the approaches to looking at persuasion, say Aristotle's or Cialdini's and so on, the connections to me all came through credibility and emotion, and they each had different ways of splitting those up, but it kind of emphasized the need for those 2 parts in order to be persuasive and build credibility. The next section that was a focus for the exam was 1.16, and that was identified as B, so skill in applying verbal and written. So demonstrating a professional presence, and in formulating a strategic message, one of those that stood out was asking thought-provoking questions, and there was a whole section on practicing questioning skills. Open and closed questions are very common. The Socratic questioning method was explained a bit further. The questions encourages responses by pretending to be uninformed is one way to look at it. That's how it was stated there. What I thought stood out even more is that the questions are encouraging participants to reach a conclusion that they thought they knew that wasn't accurate. So the questions are asking them to identify, they're probing for more information, asking them to identify their assumptions and clarify those assumptions and what the facts are to back them up. And so that's how they're getting to where they knew, where they're accurate and where they're not. One of the other things that stood out in terms of building that professional presence is building rapport with everyone. What I've marked here with the 1 is something that stood out, and then in the yellow are things that you could specifically do. Just very quickly to drop down on the map here, The skill in facilitating dialogue, again, this wasn't one of the exam topics, but especially if you would be facilitating dialogue, this identifies the principles, defining it, guidelines for doing it, and the value. So there might be times when you have to consider, oh, maybe a dialogue is when I need to do it to develop those relationships or team learning and so on. The last section for the exam looks at when the talent development professional may need to conceive, develop, and write the materials, and those are divided into 3 key areas or types: the shorter type, training materials, and longer content. Developing the materials, there were 3 main steps: write them, organize them, edit them. The thing that stood out was have a single purpose. If you're writing them, have that purpose. And communicating them, that was divided up into 3 types: routine, delivering good news, and delivering bad news. And there was some commonality that I didn't capture real well. A different type of visual might do that, but that they all had like some kind of opening and some kind of closing. Thank in advance, repeat the goodwill, and close. But what it did capture is that there's 3 types, and then a few suggestions for effective email. I will zoom out here to show how the ideas grouped, a little bit how they connected, and I will include the link to this below.